Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Answers. Tonight, we're drifting into one of the most fundamental mysteries of human existence. A question about questions themselves. Why do we ask? What drives this endless need to know, to understand, to uncover what lies hidden just beyond our current awareness? As you settle into this quiet exploration, I invite you to like and subscribe if you enjoy these peaceful journeys into the curious corners of knowledge. It helps more sleepy souls find their way here, one question at a time. But for now, all you need to do is rest. Let your mind relax. Allow yourself to drift gently as we explore this peculiar human impulse that has shaped everything we are. Questions are the engine of consciousness itself. From the moment we wake until we slip into sleep, our minds generate an endless stream of inquiries. Some bubble up unbidden, like, why does that cloud look like a dragon? Or, what would happen if I said this instead of that? Others arrive with urgency, demanding immediate answers about danger, opportunity, or the state of someone we love. We ask questions about the past, wondering how things came to be the way they are. We ask about the future, trying to glimpse what might unfold. We ask about ourselves, seeking to understand the strange creature living inside our own skin. This capacity to question seems so natural, so automatic, that we rarely pause to consider how extraordinary it truly is. Yet, in this simple act of asking, we find one of the defining characteristics that separates human consciousness from nearly everything else we know in the universe. The very question we're exploring tonight, why do we ask questions, contains within it a beautiful recursion. We are using the very capacity we are trying to understand in order to understand it. It's like holding up a mirror to examine how mirrors work, or trying to think about thinking itself. This recursive quality hints at something profound about the nature of curiosity. It's not just a tool we use to navigate the world. It's woven into the fabric of how we experience reality. Every perception carries with it the seed of a question. Every answer gives birth to new mysteries. The human mind, in this sense, is a perpetual question-generating machine, forever seeking, forever curious, forever reaching toward the next unknown. Consider for a moment the sheer volume of questions that flow through a single human life. An average person might generate thousands of questions each day, most of them so fleeting and automatic that they never reach conscious awareness. Your brain asks itself, is this surface safe to walk on? Is that person friend or threat? What does this sensation in my stomach mean? Should I trust this thought? Most of these inquiries get answered instantly by the vast unconscious machinery of cognition, leaving only a small fraction to bubble up into your aware experience as actual articulated questions. But even those conscious questions are astonishing in their variety and depth. We ask about atoms and galaxies, about love and loneliness, about the taste of strawberries and the nature of time itself. No other creature we know of asks questions with such range, such abstraction, such stubborn insistence on pushing beyond the immediately useful toward the purely theoretical. This drive to question appears to be hardwired into our biology, yet it's also profoundly shaped by culture, experience, and the environments we inhabit. Some people seem born with an insatiable hunger for answers, while others grow comfortable with ambiguity and unknowing. Some questions feel urgent and pressing, creating an almost physical discomfort until they're resolved, while others sit quietly in the background of awareness, interesting but not demanding. The psychology of questioning reveals itself as a rich territory, one where neuroscience, evolution, philosophy, and everyday human experience converge in fascinating ways. Tonight, as we explore this landscape together, we'll discover that the simple act of asking why carries within it layers of meaning, purpose, and beauty that most of us have never fully appreciated. So take a deep breath, let your shoulders fall, and allow your curiosity to guide you gently into this exploration of curiosity itself. The birth of curiosity, children, and the art of why. If you've ever spent time with a young child, you've witnessed the purest expression of human curiosity that exists. Children between the ages of 2 and 5 enter a phase that parents sometimes call the why stage. Though this charming label barely captures the relentless intensity of a child's need to understand. Researchers who have actually counted have found something remarkable. On average, a 4-year-old child asks about 107 questions per hour during their waking time. That's nearly 2 questions every single minute. Imagine maintaining that pace yourself. Within a single day, a curious child might generate more explicit questions than many adults ask in an entire week. This isn't random noise or simple attention-seeking. It represents a sophisticated cognitive project unfolding in real time. When a child asks why the sky is blue, they're not just seeking a fact to memorize. They're building a mental model of how the world works. The answer they receive becomes a foundation stone for future understanding, a piece in an elaborate puzzle their brain is assembling. If you tell them the sky is blue because of how sunlight scatters in the atmosphere, they might immediately ask why light scatters, revealing that each answer is really just a doorway to deeper questions. This cascading curiosity reflects a fundamental truth about learning. Understanding doesn't arrive in isolated chunks, but rather grows through networks of connected knowledge, each fact linking to others in an ever-expanding web of comprehension. The child who asks endless questions is doing exactly what evolution designed them to do, constructing a working model of reality that will serve them throughout life. What makes childhood curiosity so powerful is its fearlessness. Young children haven't yet learned to worry about looking foolish or asking the wrong question. They haven't absorbed the social anxieties that often silence adult curiosity. A 5-year-old will happily ask their grandmother why her skin looks wrinkly, or inquire loudly in a quiet museum why that statue doesn't have any clothes on. These questions might make adults cringe, but they represent cognition operating at full throttle, unencumbered by self-consciousness or social filtering. The child's mind encounters something it doesn't understand and immediately, reflexively, seeks explanation. There's no hesitation, no second-guessing, no wondering if the question is too simple or too complex. Just pure, unfiltered curiosity expressing itself in the most direct way possible. The neural architecture supporting this extraordinary questioning behavior is rapidly developing during these early years. A child's brain is building connections at an astounding rate, forming new synapses by the millions as it processes experiences and integrates information. Each question, asked and answered, helps strengthen certain neural pathways while pruning others. The very act of questioning stimulates brain regions involved in memory, prediction, and causal reasoning. When a child asks why something happens, their brain activates systems that try to build causal models, linking events together in chains of cause and effect. This is sophisticated cognitive work, the kind that forms the foundation for all future learning and reasoning. The child who never stopped asking why grows up with a brain well practiced in the art of causal thinking, equipped to understand not just what happens, but why things happen, and how different phenomena relate to one another. Yet something troubling happens as children move through the education system. That explosive curiosity begins to dim. Research by psychologist Susan Engel revealed a stark decline in what she calls episodes of curiosity as children progress through school. She observed classrooms and counted moments where children exhibited clear curiosity behaviors, like asking direct questions, manipulating objects to understand them better, or engaging in focused, intent observation. In kindergarten classrooms, these episodes occurred about 2 1/3 times during a 2-hour observation period. That might not sound like much, but remember that these are just the most obvious outward manifestations of curiosity in a structured classroom setting. By 5th grade, however, those episodes had plummeted to less than half of 1 instance per 2-hour period. The children hadn't lost their capacity for curiosity. Rather, the environment had somehow trained them to suppress it, to sit quietly, to wait for information to be delivered rather than actively seeking it out. Multiple factors contribute to this decline, and understanding them helps illuminate why so many adults struggle to maintain the questioning spirit that came so naturally in childhood. Schools often prioritize right answers over good questions. The structure of most education systems rewards students who can successfully recall and reproduce information, not those who challenge assumptions or explore tangents. A child who asks too many questions might be seen as disruptive, slowing down the class or preventing the teacher from covering required material. Standardized tests measure the acquisition of specific knowledge, not the depth of curiosity or the quality of the questions asked. Over time, children internalize these implicit messages. They learn that asking questions can mark you as slow or confused, that the goal is to already know things rather than to discover them. The system, often inadvertently, trains natural curiosity out of children just when it should be fostering and celebrating it. Beyond school structure, there are emotional and social factors at play. As children grow older, they become more aware of social dynamics and peer judgments. Asking a question means admitting you don't know something, and in many cultures, not knowing becomes associated with weakness or stupidity. Children begin to feel shame around their ignorance rather than seeing unknowing as a natural state and questions as tools for growth. This shift is subtle but profound. A 7-year-old might hesitate before raising their hand, wondering if their question is too obvious, if everyone else already knows the answer, if asking will make them look foolish in front of their classmates. That moment of hesitation, repeated thousands of times over years, can gradually transform into a habit of silence. The child learns to swallow their questions, to look things up privately later, or simply to let curiosity die unanswered rather than risk the vulnerability of asking. This tragedy of declining curiosity has enormous consequences. When children stop asking questions, they stop actively constructing knowledge and start passively receiving it. Their learning becomes shallower, less connected, less meaningful. The rich causal models they were building begin to stagnate, replaced by isolated facts that sit in memory without deep understanding or flexible application. The brain, still developing during these crucial years, adapts to this new mode of operation. Neural pathways associated with active inquiry and causal reasoning may not develop as robustly as they would have with continued questioning. The loss isn't just about missing specific pieces of information, it's about missing the practice of learning how to learn, the development of thinking skills that make someone genuinely capable rather than merely informed. Yet the story doesn't end in pessimism. One of the most hopeful findings in curiosity research is that this capacity can be rekindled even after years of dormancy. Adults can learn to question again, to reclaim that childhood wonder that might have been suppressed by years of education and socialization. The neuroplasticity that allows a child's brain to build questioning skills doesn't disappear entirely in adulthood. It becomes more difficult, requiring conscious effort and practice, but it remains possible. People who deliberately cultivate their curiosity, who practice asking questions and following where those questions lead, find that the muscle memory of childhood inquiry begins to return. The brain, wonderfully adaptive, responds to this renewed practice by strengthening the relevant neural networks once more. The curious child that once lived inside every adult never truly dies. It just falls asleep, waiting for the right conditions to awaken once more. The brain's reward system. Why questions feel good. Deep within your skull, in structures whose names most people have never heard, something remarkable happens every time a question forms in your mind. Your brain's reward system, the same neural architecture that responds to food when you're hungry or money when you're seeking wealth, lights up in response to the mere possibility of gaining information. This discovery, made possible by brain imaging technologies that can watch the living brain at work, has revolutionized our understanding of why humans are driven to ask questions. Information, it turns out, is not just useful. The brain treats it as inherently valuable, as rewarding in and of itself, regardless of whether that information can be practically applied to improve your life. To your brain, knowing things feels good in a fundamental, biological way. At the heart of this system is dopamine, a neurotransmitter that has become famous in popular science for its role in pleasure and motivation. But the dopamine's function is more subtle and interesting than simply making things feel good. It's part of a prediction and learning system that constantly evaluates whether reality is better or worse than expected. When something surprising and positive happens, when you get more reward than you anticipated, dopamine neurons fire intensely, creating that characteristic surge of good feeling and simultaneously strengthening the behaviors and thoughts that led to that moment. This system evolved to help animals learn what actions lead to food, safety, and reproductive success. But in humans, this ancient machinery has been repurposed in fascinating ways. The brain can treat abstract information as if it were a tangible reward, activating the same dopamine pathways that respond to chocolate cake or unexpected money. Researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, conducted an elegant study that demonstrated this effect with striking clarity. They had participants play a gambling game while lying inside a functional MRI scanner, a device that can track which brain regions are active at any given moment. The participants were shown various lotteries and asked how much they would be willing to pay to receive information about their odds of winning. Sometimes the information was actually useful because it could help them make better decisions about whether to bet. But sometimes the information was completely non-instrumental, meaning it couldn't change anything about their situation or improve their outcomes. They would find out the odds after the betting was already complete, when the information had no possible practical value. The fascinating finding was that people were still willing to pay for this useless information, and their brains showed activation in the striatum and ventromedial prefrontal cortex, regions strongly associated with processing rewards and valuation. The brain was treating information like a reward, even when that information couldn't be used for anything concrete. This effect helps explain a familiar experience. You've probably found yourself compulsively checking your phone, refreshing email or social media, even when you're not expecting anything important. You're seeking information, and each little notification or update triggers a small dopamine response, creating a miniature reward cycle that can become genuinely addictive. The brain isn't carefully analyzing whether this particular piece of information is useful. It's responding to information itself as intrinsically valuable, as something worth seeking and acquiring. This can lead to what researchers call idle curiosity, the desire to know things simply for the sake of knowing them, even when they have no bearing on any decision you need to make or any problem you're trying to solve. You might check the score of a sports game you're not personally invested in, or look up the population of Madagascar, despite having no plans to visit, simply because not knowing creates a small cognitive itch that knowing will scratch. The anticipation of receiving information can actually be more rewarding than the information itself. Your brain generates predictions about what you are going to learn, and the process of waiting and wondering creates its own particular pleasure. This anticipatory reward system likely evolved because it motivates the seeking behavior itself. If only the final answer felt good, you might never bother to look for it. But by making the pursuit rewarding, evolution ensures that you keep asking questions, keep investigating, keep exploring your environment. The neuroscientist Reid Montague has described this as the brain essentially gambling on information, betting cognitive resources on the possibility that what you learn will turn out to be useful. The anticipated value of information gets amplified beyond its objective worth, making even trivial questions feel more pressing than they rationally should. When questions arise in the mind, they don't just activate reward systems. They trigger what researchers call instinctive elaboration, a mental reflex where your brain immediately begins trying to answer the question. It can't help itself. Once a question has been posed, either by you or by someone else, your mind starts running simulations, pulling up relevant memories, testing possible answers against what you know. This process happens automatically, often before conscious awareness fully catches up. If someone asks you what you had for breakfast yesterday, your brain immediately begins searching for that memory, reconstructing the experience, testing its certainty. You didn't choose to begin this search. The question itself triggered it. This instinctive response helps explain why questions are such powerful tools for guiding thought. When you pose a question to yourself or to someone else, you're not just requesting information. You're directing cognitive resources, forcing the brain to allocate processing power toward a specific target. The neuroscience of questioning reveals that different types of curiosity activate somewhat different brain networks. When you experience what psychologist Daniel Berline called perceptual curiosity, driven by ambiguous or surprising sensory input like a blurry image that you're trying to identify, your brain shows strong activation in areas involved in visual processing and attention, along with the reward system. The brain seems to be working hard to resolve the ambiguity, treating clarity as its own reward. But when you experience epistemic curiosity, the deeper desire for knowledge and understanding that drives scientific inquiry or philosophical questioning, different regions show enhanced activity. The hippocampus, crucial for memory formation and learning, becomes more engaged. Connections between the hippocampus and dopamine-producing areas strengthen, creating a state where you're not just motivated to find the answer, but also primed to remember it once you do. Curiosity literally opens a window of enhanced learning, making information acquired during curious states more likely to stick in long-term memory. Recent research has also revealed fascinating nuances in how the brain evaluates questions and information. People show a valence bias in their information seeking, meaning they're more motivated to get information about potentially positive outcomes than potentially negative ones. If you're waiting to hear about two different job applications, one for a dream position and one for a backup option, you'll likely feel more urgency about learning the result of the dream job application. Your brain anticipates that good news will feel better than bad news feels bad. So it drives you more strongly toward information that might be positive. Researchers studying this effect found that administering L-Dopa, a drug that increases dopamine levels, actually changed this pattern. People given L-Dopa showed equal information seeking about potential gains and losses, suggesting that dopamine doesn't just generally boost curiosity, but specifically influences how emotional valence affects our desire to know. The brain's information-seeking system is not a simple on-off switch, but a nuanced mechanism that weighs multiple factors, including potential emotional impact, practical utility, and the pure pleasure of resolving uncertainty. Understanding these neural mechanisms helps explain why questions feel so compelling. When a good question arises, whether from within your own mind or posed by someone else, it creates a kind of cognitive tension. Your brain recognizes a gap between what you know and what you could know, and that gap activates systems designed to reduce it. The anticipated reward of closing that gap, of moving from uncertainty to knowledge, generates motivation to seek answers. This isn't a conscious calculation where you weigh costs and benefits. It's a deeper, more automatic process, operating in neural structures that evolved long before humans developed language or abstract reasoning. Your brain is essentially treating each unanswered question as a problem to be solved. And solving problems triggers the same reward mechanisms that keep you eating when hungry or seeking warmth when cold. Curiosity isn't a luxury or an optional feature of human cognition. It's wired into the fundamental architecture of how your brain processes and values the world. the knowledge gap theory, the itch we must scratch. In the early 1990s, an economist and psychologist named George Lowenstein proposed an elegant theory that has become central to understanding human curiosity. He called it the information gap theory, and its core insight is beautifully simple. Curiosity arises when we become aware of a gap between what we currently know and what we want to know. This gap creates an aversive state, an unpleasant feeling of deprivation that Lowenstein compared to hunger or thirst. Just as your body creates the sensation of hunger to motivate you to eat, your mind creates the feeling of curiosity to motivate you to seek information. The gap itself is the source of discomfort, and closing that gap by acquiring the missing knowledge provides relief and satisfaction. This explains why certain questions can feel almost physically uncomfortable, nagging at you until you find an answer or distract yourself with something else. The knowledge gap theory makes several predictions that have been borne out by research. First, you need to have some baseline knowledge about a topic before you can become curious about it. Complete ignorance doesn't generate curiosity because you don't even know what you don't know. A person who has never heard of quantum physics won't lie awake at night wondering about wave-particle duality. But once you've learned just enough to recognize that there is something interesting you don't understand, curiosity ignites. This is why good teachers often begin by giving students just enough information to make them aware of intriguing gaps in their knowledge. You tell someone that scientists have discovered that light behaves both like a wave and like a particle, which seems impossible since waves and particles are fundamentally different things. Now you've created a knowledge gap. The student knows that light does this contradictory thing, but doesn't understand how it's possible. That gap becomes an itch that demands scratching. The size and nature of the knowledge gap matters enormously. If the gap is too small, if the question is trivial or the answer obvious, curiosity remains weak. You're not going to lose sleep wondering what day of the week it is because that information is either easily available or not particularly important. But if the gap is too large, if the question is so complex or abstract that you can't even begin to imagine how you would understand it, curiosity can't gain traction either. Asking someone with no mathematical background to be curious about the Riemann hypothesis isn't likely to work because the gap is simply too vast. They can't form enough of a mental model to even understand what they don't understand. The sweet spot for curiosity lies in the middle, where the gap is large enough to be interesting but small enough to feel bridgeable. You need to be able to sense that understanding is achievable, that with some effort or some new information, you could close this gap and move from confusion to clarity. Lowenstein identified several factors that make knowledge gaps more salient, and thus more likely to trigger strong curiosity. One is posing a question explicitly. When someone asks you a direct question, especially one you feel like you should be able to answer, that creates an immediate awareness of the gap. Can you name all the continents? You probably can, but even that simple question makes you suddenly conscious of the act of naming them. Checking your mental list, making sure you haven't forgotten one. The question brings the knowledge gap into focus. Another factor is encountering information that contradicts what you thought you knew. If you believed one thing and suddenly discover evidence suggesting the opposite, that contradiction creates a particularly uncomfortable gap. You need to resolve the inconsistency, to figure out which piece of information is correct or how both can be true. This is why plot twists work so well in stories. The revelation that a trusted character was actually the villain all along creates a gap between your previous understanding of the story and this new information, and you become intensely curious about how all the pieces fit together. The feeling of curiosity that arises from knowledge gaps can vary in emotional tone. Sometimes curiosity feels pleasant, a kind of delicious anticipation as you look forward to learning something interesting. This is the curiosity you feel when you're about to watch a documentary on a topic you find fascinating, or when you're reading a mystery novel and trying to figure out who committed the crime. The gap is there, but pursuing it feels like play, like an enjoyable challenge rather than an uncomfortable lack. Other times, curiosity carries more anxiety or frustration. If you need to know something for practical reasons, if the gap has real consequences, the discomfort intensifies. Not knowing whether you got the job, whether your medical test results are normal, whether someone you care about is angry with you, these knowledge gaps can create genuine distress. The emotional valence of curiosity depends on factors like the importance of the missing information, your sense of control over acquiring it, and your personality traits around tolerance for uncertainty. One of the most interesting aspects of knowledge gap theory is how it explains why curiosity can actually increase as you learn more about a topic. You might expect that gaining knowledge would reduce curiosity by filling in gaps, and sometimes that's exactly what happens. You wonder what time the store closes. You look it up. The gap is filled. Curiosity is satisfied. But for deeper questions, each answer you discover often reveals new gaps you didn't even know existed. When you start learning about astronomy, you might be curious about why planets orbit the sun. As you learn about gravity, that question gets answered. But now you're curious about what gravity actually is, how it works at a fundamental level. That question leads to learning about space-time and quantum mechanics, which open up entire new territories of gaps. The process is recursive. Knowledge doesn't eliminate curiosity. It often deepens and sophisticates it, transforming simple questions into more complex and nuanced ones. The knowledge gap framework also helps explain individual differences in curiosity. Some people have a very low tolerance for gaps, becoming uncomfortable quickly when they don't know something and strongly motivated to close gaps as soon as they appear. These individuals might describe themselves as naturally curious, but what they're really experiencing is a low threshold for the discomfort that gaps create. Other people have higher tolerance for uncertainty and unknowing. They can sit comfortably with gaps for longer periods, not feeling the urgent need to close them immediately. This doesn't mean they're less curious in some absolute sense, but rather that they experience the knowledge gap state differently, perhaps finding it less aversive or even somewhat enjoyable as a state of open possibility. Personality traits like need for cognitive closure, tolerance for ambiguity, and openness to experience all influence how people respond to knowledge gaps, and thus how curious they seem to themselves and others. Understanding curiosity as a response to knowledge gaps has practical implications for education, communication, and self-development. If you want to make someone curious about something, the key is not just to provide information, but to create awareness of interesting gaps. point out contradictions, pose puzzling questions, show them enough to make them realize how much they don't know. Conversely, if you want to kill curiosity, either overwhelm people with so much information that they can't perceive the gaps, or provide answers so quickly that gaps never have time to generate that motivating discomfort. The most effective teachers understand this intuitively. They don't just lecture. They pose questions, create puzzles, guide students to the edge of their understanding so that the gap becomes visible and compelling. Learning becomes not just about acquiring information, but about satisfying the itch that good questions create. Two types of curiosity: perceptual and epistemic. Not all curiosity feels the same, and one of the most important distinctions in curiosity research comes from the work of psychologist Daniel Berlin, who, in the mid-20th century, proposed that we need to recognize fundamentally different varieties of curious experience. The most basic distinction he drew was between perceptual curiosity and epistemic curiosity. Two forms that arise from different triggers, serve different functions, and feel distinct in our subjective experience. Understanding these varieties helps illuminate why curiosity manifests in such diverse ways, and why the questions we ask span from the immediately practical to the profoundly abstract. Perceptual curiosity is the more primitive and automatic form. It arises in response to novel, surprising, or ambiguous sensory stimulation. When you hear an unexpected noise in another room, you feel an immediate urge to investigate. When you see something moving in your peripheral vision, your attention snaps toward it automatically. This is perceptual curiosity at work, driven by your brain's fundamental need to make sense of the immediate sensory environment. It's oriented toward the here and now, toward figuring out what that thing is, whether it's threatening or safe, whether it requires action or can be ignored. This form of curiosity is ancient in evolutionary terms. Even relatively simple animals show perceptual curiosity, exploring novel objects in their environment, investigating new sounds or smells, orienting toward unexpected changes. It's part of the basic machinery that helps organisms navigate and understand their surroundings. Perceptual curiosity often has a driven, almost compulsive quality. You hear a strange sound and you simply must investigate. The uncertainty creates immediate discomfort that demands resolution. Your attention gets captured whether you want it to or not. This is the curiosity that makes you turn your head when you hear your name called in a crowded room, or makes you unable to ignore a flickering light in your peripheral vision, even when you're trying to concentrate on something else. The brain treats ambiguous perceptual input as potentially important, worthy of immediate cognitive resources. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes perfect sense. That unexpected sound could be a predator. That movement could be prey or danger. That ambiguous shape could be something you need to investigate. Better to be curious and discover it's nothing than to ignore something truly important. Epistemic curiosity operates at a different level entirely. This is the curiosity that drives us to seek knowledge and understanding for its own sake, independent of any immediate practical application. It's the curiosity that makes a physicist wonder about the nature of dark matter, even though dark matter has no bearing on their daily life. It's what drives someone to read a biography of a historical figure who died centuries ago, or to wonder about the origins of language, or to spend hours trying to understand a complex mathematical proof. Epistemic curiosity isn't about resolving immediate ambiguity in the environment. It's about building deeper models of how things work, about understanding causes and principles, about fitting pieces of knowledge together into coherent frameworks. This form of curiosity feels qualitatively different. It's contemplative rather than urgent, intellectually engaging rather than perceptually driven. Within epistemic curiosity, Berline made another useful distinction between what he called specific and diversive curiosity. Specific curiosity is directed toward a particular question or gap in knowledge. You want to know specifically how antibiotics kill bacteria, or what caused the fall of the Roman Empire, or why your computer keeps crashing. There's a definite target, a specific piece of understanding you're seeking. This is the curiosity that drives focused learning and sustained investigation. You stay with a question, exploring it from different angles, gathering relevant information, working toward a satisfying answer. Specific curiosity can be intense and consuming, leading people to spend hours or pursuing particular questions that fascinate them. Diversive curiosity, by contrast, is more diffuse and exploratory. It's the restless desire for novelty and stimulation without a particular target. When you find yourself scrolling through random articles online, jumping from topic to topic with no particular goal, you're experiencing diversive curiosity. It's the mental state that makes you browse a bookstore picking up different volumes to read their back covers, or flip through TV channels sampling different shows, or wander through a museum looking at whatever catches your eye. There's no specific gap you're trying to fill, no particular question driving you. Instead, you're seeking varied stimulation, exposing yourself to new information almost for its own sake, enjoying the process of encountering novelty. Diversive curiosity can seem less purposeful than specific curiosity, but it serves important functions. It's how you discover new interests, stumble upon unexpected connections, and keep your mind engaged and stimulated when no particular problem demands your attention. These different forms of curiosity activate somewhat different neural networks and serve complementary roles in human cognition. Perceptual curiosity keeps you alert and responsive to your immediate environment. It's fast, automatic, and tied to basic survival functions. Epistemic curiosity, both specific and diversive, is more uniquely human, more dependent on language and abstract thought, more connected to our capacity for building complex mental models that extend far beyond immediate experience. Both are valuable, but they create different kinds of questions. Perceptual curiosity generates questions like, what is that sound? What does this smell indicate? What should I do about this unexpected event? Epistemic curiosity generates questions like, how does gravity actually work? Why do humans create art? What is the relationship between consciousness and the physical brain? Understanding these distinctions helps explain why curiosity sometimes feels pleasurable and other times feels uncomfortable or even anxious. Perceptual curiosity often carries a hint of threat or urgency because it's responding to ambiguity that could indicate danger. Your brain doesn't know what that unexpected noise is, so it puts you into a slightly heightened state of alertness until you resolve the ambiguity. Epistemic curiosity, especially when diversive, tends to feel more purely pleasurable because it's not threat-related. You're seeking knowledge in a relatively safe context, exploring ideas that interest you without any pressure to apply them immediately. The pleasure comes from the anticipation of learning and the satisfaction of fitting new pieces into your mental model of the world. Different people show different balances among these types of curiosity. Some individuals are extremely high in perceptual curiosity, constantly noticing details in their environment, easily distracted by novel stimuli, always looking around to see what's happening. Others are lower in this dimension, more able to maintain focus, less reactive to environmental novelty. Similarly, people vary in their epistemic curiosity, with some showing intense specific curiosity that leads them to become experts in particular domains, while others are more diversively curious, sampling widely across many topics without diving deeply into any single one. Neither pattern is inherently better. They represent different strategies for navigating information and building knowledge, each with its own strengths and limitations. Cultivating the right kinds of curiosity for your goals and context can be a powerful tool for learning and growth. If you want to develop deep expertise, you need to strengthen specific epistemic curiosity, learning to sustain focus on particular questions even when answers don't come easily. If you want to make creative connections across domains, diversive curiosity becomes more valuable, exposing you to a wide range of ideas and information from which unexpected insights might emerge. If you want to be more so present and attentive to your immediate experience, developing perceptual curiosity helps you notice details you might otherwise miss. The questions you ask reflect the types of curiosity you're exercising, and by consciously choosing what to be curious about, you can gradually shape the patterns of questioning that feel most natural to you. The evolution of asking. Why humans question more than other species. While many animals show curiosity in the sense of exploring their environment and investigating novel objects, the depth and abstraction of human questioning appears unique in the natural world. No other species, as far as we can tell, asks questions about the nature of time, or wonders why there is something rather than nothing, or seeks to understand the origins of the universe. This extraordinary capacity must have evolutionary roots, some set of developments that made the human brain not just curious in a general sense, but specifically capable of generating and pursuing abstract questions far removed from immediate survival needs. Understanding why humans question so much and so deeply requires looking at the peculiar path our species took as it evolved. The story begins with neuron density. Your brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons, the specialized cells that process and transmit information. This is an impressive number, but more impressive is how many of those neurons are packed into your cerebral cortex, the wrinkled outer layer that handles complex cognitive functions. Humans have about 16 billion cortical neurons, more than any other animal. For many years, neuroscientists assumed that all mammal brains scaled in roughly the same way, that a bigger brain simply meant more neurons distributed proportionally across different regions. But research by Brazilian neuroscientist Susana Herculano Hausel revealed something surprising. Different lineages of mammals use different scaling rules, In primates, which includes humans, the brain achieves much more efficient packing. A primate brain that's 10 times heavier than another primate brain contains roughly 10 times more neurons. But in rodents, getting 10 times more neurons requires a brain that's about 50 times heavier. Primates evolved a way to cram more computing power into less space. This efficient neural architecture gave primates, and especially humans, a significant cognitive advantage without requiring impossibly large heads. But having the lots of neurons creates a problem. Neurons are metabolically expensive, using significant amounts of energy to maintain their electrical activity and chemical signaling. The human brain, despite being only about 2% of the body weight, consumes roughly 20% of your metabolic energy at rest. Feeding such a hungry organ requires a reliable supply of high-quality energy, which helps explain several important developments in human evolution. The adoption of cooking, which makes nutrients more available and reduces the energy needed for digestion, may have been crucial in supporting the expansion of the energy-demanding brain. Similarly, shifts toward higher quality food sources, including meat with its dense protein and fat content, provided the calories necessary to sustain all those neurons. As human brains grew larger and more complex over the past 2 million years, something remarkable happened. The cognitive capacities that originally evolved for dealing with immediate, practical problems, like finding food, avoiding predators, and navigating social hierarchies, began to generate abilities that went far beyond those original functions. This is a common pattern in evolution, called acceptation, where a feature that evolved for one purpose gets repurposed for something else entirely. The neural machinery for tracking cause and effect in the physical world could be applied to abstract causal reasoning. The systems for social cognition, for modeling what other individuals were thinking and feeling, could be turned inward to model your own mental states or outward to model the minds of imaginary beings. The capacity for mental time travel, simulating possible futures to plan ahead, could be extended to imagine distant pasts or hypothetical scenarios that might never occur. Language played a crucial catalytic role in this transformation. Once, humans developed the ability to use symbols systematically, to create words that stood for objects, actions, and eventually abstract concepts. Questioning became exponentially more powerful. You could now ask not just about things in your immediate environment, but about anything that could be named or described. You could ask about things that happened before you were born, or that might happen after you die, or that exist in far distant places, or that might not exist at all except as possibilities. Language allowed questions to break free from the here and now, to range across time and space and into the realm of pure abstraction. A pre-linguistic creature can wonder about the strange object in front of it, but only a linguistic creature can wonder about the nature of justice, or what might have happened if history had unfolded differently, or whether there are limits to what can be known. The social nature of human life also amplified the importance and utility of questioning. Humans are extraordinarily social primates, living in large groups with complex relationship networks. Navigating this social world requires constantly modeling other minds, predicting what others will do, understanding their motivations and beliefs. Asking questions, both internally to yourself and explicitly to others, became a crucial tool for gathering the information needed to function socially. you need to know what someone intends, what they believe, what they want, whether they're trustworthy. Asking questions directly is often the most efficient way to access this hidden information. But even your private internal questions about social matters serve important functions. Wondering why someone acted a certain way helps you build better models of their character and likely future behavior. The social complexity of human life created strong selective pressure for minds that could generate sophisticated questions about intentions, beliefs, and social dynamics. Culture, the ability to accumulate and transmit knowledge across generations, created a positive feedback loop with questioning. Once humans could pass knowledge from one generation to the next through teaching and storytelling, the overall knowledge base available to each generation increased. But more knowledge creates more awareness of gaps and contradictions, which in turn generates more questions. A child growing up in a culture with rich oral traditions about the stars might hear stories explaining the constellations, which leads to questions about whether those stories are literally true, which leads to questions about what the stars actually are, which eventually leads to astronomy. Each answer opens new questions. Each generation, building on the questions and answers of their predecessors, pushed understanding a bit further. The very act of asking questions, of being curious about how things work, became culturally valued in many societies because it led to useful knowledge and innovations. Individual variation in curiosity likely also faced evolutionary pressures. In a group, having some individuals who are intensely curious and willing to explore unknown territories or try new approaches creates benefits for the group as a whole, even if those individuals sometimes take risky actions. Other individuals might be more conservative, sticking with proven methods and serving as a stabilizing force. Both strategies have value, and human populations show wide variation in trait curiosity, suggesting that natural selection maintained diversity rather than pushing everyone toward a single optimum level. This variation means some people are naturally inclined to ask many questions and pursue answers with great persistence, while others are more content with existing knowledge. Both types contribute to human success in different ways. The cumulative effect of these evolutionary developments, neural architecture, metabolic support, language, social complexity, and cultural transmission, produced a species uniquely capable of asking abstract questions about anything and everything. Humans don't just wonder what that object over there is. They wonder why objects exist at all, what it means for something to exist, whether existence itself requires explanation. They ask not just how to hunt more effectively, but why hunting feels morally different from farming, whether animals have experiences that matter morally, what obligations humans have toward other species. The capacity for abstraction, enabled by a large and efficient brain and amplified by language and culture, allows human curiosity to range into territories no other species seems to access. This doesn't make humans better or more valuable than other creatures, but it does make us different in ways that are genuinely remarkable and worth trying to understand. Questions as social tools. Building connection through inquiry. Questions don't just help us understand the physical world or abstract ideas. They're also powerful social tools, instruments we use to navigate relationships, build connections, and signal our interest in others. The questions you ask someone reveal a great deal about how you see them and what you care about. They can create intimacy or maintain distance, build trust or inspire wariness, demonstrate genuine curiosity or polite disinterest. Understanding the social dimensions of questioning illuminates why some conversations feel deeply satisfying, while others leave us feeling unseen and disconnected. Consider what happens when someone asks you a thoughtful question about your experience, your perspective, or your feelings. The very act of asking communicates something important. It says that the asker considers your inner world worth knowing about, that they're willing to invest attention and energy into understanding you better. This creates a feeling of being valued and recognized that's fundamental to human social bonds. In contrast, when someone never asks you questions, only talks about themselves and their own concerns, you feel invisible, as though your existence barely registers in their awareness. The presence or absence of genuine questions thus becomes a powerful signal of how much someone cares about you and values your perspective. Social psychologist Arthur Aaron demonstrated this effect dramatically with an experiment that became famous for its surprising results. He developed a set of 36 questions designed to create rapid intimacy between strangers. The questions start relatively surface level, asking things like what would constitute a perfect day for you, or if you could invite anyone to dinner, who would you choose? But they gradually become more personal and vulnerable, eventually asking things like, for what in your life do you feel most grateful? Or when did you last cry in front of another person? Pairs of strangers who took turns asking and answering these questions reported feeling significantly closer to each other than control pairs who engaged in small talk. Some pairs even developed lasting friendships or romantic relationships. The questions worked their magic by creating a structured path toward mutual vulnerability and understanding, each answer revealing something genuine about the person, each question signaling that such revelation was welcomed and valued. The key mechanism behind this effect is reciprocal self-disclosure. When you ask someone a personal question, and they answer honestly, they're making themselves vulnerable by sharing something real about their inner experience. This vulnerability creates an opportunity for connection, but only if it's met with appropriate response. If you respond with judgment or indifference, the person will likely close up, regretting their openness. But if you respond with interest, empathy, and your own matching vulnerability, a bond begins to form. The questions guide this process, helping two people navigate toward increasingly meaningful territory. They provide a framework that makes vulnerability feel safer because both people are following the same structure, both taking similar risks. Questions also serve crucial functions in everyday conversations beyond building intimacy. They're tools for maintaining engagement, showing interest, and guiding the flow of discussion. A skilled conversationalist uses questions to draw quiet people into the dialogue, to steer conversation away from contentious topics when needed, or to dive deeper into subjects that seem to energize the group. The timing and phrasing of questions matter enormously. A question asked at the right moment can open someone up, while the same question asked too early or in the wrong tone might make them defensive. Good questions in social contexts often contain an element of genuine curiosity combined with emotional intelligence about what the other person is comfortable discussing. Different cultures have quite different norms around questioning. In some cultural contexts, asking direct questions, especially about personal matters, is seen as intrusive or rude. People are expected to share information voluntarily, and probing questions suggest that the asker doesn't trust the other person to provide relevant information without prompting. In other cultures, asking questions is a sign of engagement and interest, and failing to ask follow-up questions about what someone has shared might be interpreted as indifference. These cultural differences can create misunderstandings when people from different backgrounds interact. What one person experiences as friendly curiosity, another might feel as inappropriate prying. Learning to read these cultural nuances, to understand when questioning is welcome and when it's not, requires social intelligence and often some explicit learning about norms that might differ from what you grew up with. The questions we ask also reveal our assumptions and biases, sometimes in ways we don't intend. When meeting someone for the first time, if you immediately ask, "Where are you from?" you're signaling that you perceive them as potentially not belonging to your current location, which might be based on their appearance, accent, or other markers. The question might be motivated by genuine curiosity, but it can also make the other person feel marked as an outsider. Similarly, the questions you don't ask can be revealing. If you never ask someone about their family, you might be signaling either that you respect their privacy or that you're not interested in that dimension of their life, and the other person has to guess which interpretation is correct. The subtleties of social questioning are complex, which is why socially anxious people often worry intensely about asking the wrong questions or failing to ask the right ones. Questions can also be wielded as tools of power and control, not just connection. In interrogation contexts, questions are designed to extract information from someone who might prefer to withhold it, creating an adversarial dynamic rather than a collaborative one. Even in less extreme contexts, the person asking questions often holds a kind of conversational power, directing the flow of information and requiring the other person to respond. This is why job interviews, first dates, and other evaluative contexts can feel uncomfortable for the person being questioned. They're in a reactive position, answering questions rather than shaping the conversation, which can feel vulnerable and exposing. Balancing this dynamic often requires the questioner to share information themselves, to make the exchange feel more reciprocal and less like an interrogation. Learning to ask better questions is thus not just about satisfying your own curiosity, but about becoming a better friend, partner, colleague, and conversationalist. It means developing the skill of genuine inquiry, asking questions you actually want to hear the answers to rather than simply filling conversational space. It means listening carefully to responses and following up with questions that build on what you've learned, showing that you're truly paying attention. It means being sensitive to signals that someone is uncomfortable with a line of questioning and gracefully steering elsewhere. And it means being willing to answer the same kinds of questions you ask, creating genuine reciprocity rather than one-sided extraction. The best conversations feel like explorations that both people are undertaking together, each person's questions and answers building on the others, creating a shared journey toward understanding. The dark side of knowing when we avoid questions. For all the ways that curiosity drives human behavior, there's a paradox at the heart of our relationship with questions. Sometimes we actively avoid them. We shy away from asking, from seeking information, from learning truths that might be uncomfortable or threatening. This phenomenon, called information avoidance, reveals that the human need to know is not absolute. It competes with other needs, like the need to maintain hope, to preserve self-image, to avoid painful truths, or to keep relationships intact. Understanding when and why we avoid questions illuminates the complex psychology of curiosity and the many factors that shape whether we seek or flee from knowledge. The most obvious case of information avoidance occurs around bad news. If you're waiting for medical test results, or feedback on an important project, or word about whether a relationship will survive, part of you desperately wants to know the answer immediately. But another part might prefer to remain in uncertainty, at least for a while, because not knowing means you can still hope for the best. Once you know the truth, if it's bad, you'll have to face it and deal with the consequences. During the period of not knowing, you can exist in a strange liminal space where the outcome you fear hasn't happened yet, where possibility remains open. This is why people sometimes delay scheduling medical appointments even when they're worried about symptoms, or put off checking their bank balance when they suspect they've overspent, or avoid reading reviews of their work when they fear criticism. Research on information seeking has documented a consistent valence bias. People are much more motivated to seek information about potentially positive outcomes than potentially negative ones. If you've entered 2 different competitions, one with a prize you desperately want and one with a consolation prize, you'll check more frequently for results about the one you care more about. Your brain anticipates that good news will bring more pleasure than bad news will bring pain, even though psychologically, losses often hurt more than equivalent gains feel good. This asymmetry in information seeking creates situations where ignorance is actively maintained around topics that might contain bad news. The gap remains unfilled not because you lack access to information, but because part of you prefers not to close that particular gap. Fear plays a complex role in this avoidance. Sometimes people avoid questions because they're genuinely afraid of what they might learn. A person might avoid asking their partner about the state of their relationship because they fear the answer might be that the relationship is ending. Better to live in uncertain hope than to face certain loss. This can lead to prolonged periods of strategic ignorance where important questions don't get asked, issues don't get discussed, and problems fester beneath the surface of enforced not knowing. The irony is that this avoidance often makes situations worse. The question that goes unasked, the issue that doesn't get addressed, tends to grow more serious over time. But in the moment, the psychological comfort of not having to face a feared truth can feel preferable to the anxiety of asking and hearing an answer you dread. Social factors also suppress questioning in powerful ways. In many contexts, asking questions makes you vulnerable because it reveals your ignorance. If you're in a meeting and everyone else seems to understand what's being discussed, asking for clarification risks making you look foolish or incompetent. The social cost of exposing your lack of knowledge can feel higher than the benefit of actually gaining that knowledge. This dynamic is especially strong in competitive or judgmental environments, where seeming smart or competent is important. Students in classrooms often don't ask questions they genuinely have because they don't want to look stupid in front of peers. Employees in meetings stay silent even when confused because they fear negative judgment from colleagues or supervisors. The need to protect social standing and self-image overrides the need to know. Cultural factors can systematically discourage questioning in even broader ways. Authoritarian systems, whether political, religious, or institutional, often discourage questions that might challenge established authority or doctrine. Asking why we do things this way might be seen as disrespectful, subversive, or dangerous. In cultures that emphasize obedience and conformity, questioning can be actively punished, teaching people from an early age that it's safer and smarter to accept what they're told than to probe and challenge. This creates populations that are less curious, less innovative, and less capable of recognizing and correcting errors in the system. The suppression of questioning serves those in power by reducing challenges to their authority. But it imposes enormous costs on the society as a whole by closing off avenues for learning, improvement, and adaptation. Some personality traits make individuals more prone to information avoidance. People who are high in need for cognitive closure, who feel uncomfortable with ambiguity and uncertainty, sometimes paradoxically avoid questions because those questions would open up uncertainty in areas where they've achieved comfortable certainty. If you've decided that your political party is right about everything, asking genuine questions about specific policies might introduce doubt and complexity that you find uncomfortable. So you avoid the questions. Stick with the simple narrative you've already accepted, and maintain your sense of certainty even if it means remaining ignorant of inconvenient facts. Similarly, people with low tolerance for emotional discomfort might avoid questions that could lead to painful emotions, preferring a narrower but more comfortable range of awareness. Interestingly, modern technology has created new forms of information avoidance. The overwhelming abundance of available information means you can't possibly attend to all of it, so you must selectively ignore vast amounts. But the mechanisms you use to filter often end up creating echo chambers, where you're exposed primarily to information that confirms what you already believe, and shielded from information that might challenge it. Recommendation algorithms on social media platforms learn what keeps your attention and show you more of the same. Search engines personalize results based on your past behavior. The questions you don't think to ask because they never occur to you, or because your informational environment doesn't surface them, might be the most important ones. This subtle form of avoidance operates without conscious intention, built into the architecture of how you access information. Understanding information avoidance isn't about condemning it as simply irrational or weak. Often, there are real psychological costs to knowing things, and sometimes those costs outweigh the benefits. A person might be happier not knowing every criticism someone has of them, or not learning details about a partner's past that would only create jealousy without providing useful information. The key is developing awareness about when avoidance is serving you and when it's keeping you from necessary knowledge. Some questions should be asked even when the answers might be uncomfortable, because not asking them leads to worse outcomes. Other questions might genuinely be better left unasked. Developing wisdom around this distinction, learning when to push past discomfort and seek truth, and when to accept beneficial ignorance, is one of the subtler skills of a well-lived life. The creative power of questions. Innovation through inquiry. If you examine the history of human innovation, whether in science, technology, art, or social organization, you'll find that breakthrough often begins with a question. Someone wonders whether things have to be the way they currently are. Someone asks what would happen if we tried a different approach. Someone questions an assumption that everyone else has been taking for granted. The creative power of questions lies not just in leading to answers, but in opening up possibility space, revealing new directions that weren't visible before the question was posed. Understanding how questions catalyze creativity helps explain why curious individuals and cultures tend to be more innovative and adaptive. Scientific progress offers the clearest examples of this principle. Every major scientific revolution began with someone asking a question that challenged prevailing assumptions. Newton asked why objects move the way they do and why planets orbit in particular patterns, leading to his laws of motion and universal gravitation. Einstein asked what would happen to your perception of time and space if you were traveling at the speed of light, a thought experiment that eventually led to relativity theory. Darwin asked why different islands in the Galapagos had birds with similar but distinctly different beak shapes, a question that helped him develop the theory of evolution by natural selection. These weren't just idle questions. They were carefully formulated inquiries that identified tensions in existing understanding and pointed toward where new insight might be found. The key to generative questioning is often challenging assumptions that others treat as obvious or unquestionable. Every field of knowledge rests on certain foundational assumptions, things that practitioners take for granted without much examination. Most of the time, these assumptions are useful and approximately correct, which is why they became assumptions in the first place. But occasionally, questioning one of these foundations reveals that it was actually limiting, that relaxing or replacing that assumption opens up entirely new ways of thinking. This is why outsiders to a field sometimes make important contributions. They don't yet know what the experts know isn't worth questioning, so they ask naive questions that turn out to be profound. In creative fields like art, literature, and music, questions drive innovation in similar ways. An artist might ask, what would happen if I use these materials in a way they're not typically used? Or, what if I tried to convey this emotion without using any of the conventional techniques? A writer might wonder how a story would unfold if told backwards, or from the perspective of an inanimate object, or in a way that intentionally violates narrative conventions. These questions aren't seeking factual answers, but exploring possibility space, testing boundaries, discovering new forms of expression. The questions themselves become part of the creative process, guiding experimentation and opening avenues that lead to novel work. Problem solving in any domain benefits from strategic questioning. When you encounter a difficult problem, your initial framing of what the problem is determines which solutions you'll consider. But if you ask questions about the framing itself, you might realize you're trying to solve the wrong problem. A classic example comes from the history of transportation. In the 19th century, people were trying to breed faster horses to improve the speed of horse-drawn transportation. The question was, how can we make horses faster? But some people asked a different question. Do we need horses at all for transportation? Could we use a different mechanism entirely? This reframing led to the development of mechanical vehicles, ultimately transforming transportation in ways that no amount of horse breeding could have achieved. The meta-question, the question about what question we should be asking, often turns out to be more important than any answer to the original question. Brainstorming techniques often explicitly leverage the power of the questions. Instead of just trying to think of good ideas, which can feel pressured and uncreative, groups generate questions about the problem or challenge. What else could this be? Why does it have to work this way? What if we removed this constraint? Who else has solved a similar problem in a different domain? These questions help break habitual thought patterns and open up new directions for exploration. Even if the questions don't immediately produce solutions, they create mental space for novel ideas to emerge. The act of questioning itself seems to put the brain into a more flexible, exploratory mode, where unlikely connections become more visible. Children's questions, despite or perhaps because of their lack of sophistication, sometimes point toward deep insights. A child asking why the sky is blue might be satisfied with a simple answer about light scattering, but they might follow up with questions that push toward genuinely profound territory. Why does light scatter? What is light made of? How do we know? These cascading questions can lead, if followed seriously, all the way to fundamental questions in physics about the nature of electromagnetic radiation and quantum mechanics. The child isn't trying to revolutionize physics, but their naive questioning strategy, following each answer with another why, naturally traces a path toward foundational issues that experts might have forgotten are actually strange and worth examining. Organizations and societies that encourage questioning tend to be more innovative and adaptive than those that discourage it. When people feel free to ask why we do things this way, and whether there might be better approaches, improvements emerge. When questioning is suppressed, either through explicit prohibition or through cultural norms that make it uncomfortable, stagnation follows. The ability to question and challenge, to propose new ideas without fear of punishment or ridicule, is thus not just a matter of intellectual freedom, but a practical requirement for healthy innovation. Creative organizations often deliberately cultivate cultures of questioning, where all ideas are initially treated as provisional and subject to examination, where even junior members are encouraged to ask questions that might challenge how senior members think about things. The relationship between questions and answers in creative work is often more complex than simply seeking to replace every question with a definitive answer. Sometimes the question itself is the point, meant to open up reflection rather than close down on a solution. Philosophical questions like what is consciousness or what makes a life meaningful might not have tidy answers, but grappling with them shapes how you think and live. Artistic questions like how can I capture this feeling, or what happens if I combine these usually separate styles don't have single correct answers, but rather open up spaces for exploration and expression. The value of these questions lies in the thinking they provoke, the directions they point toward, the possibilities they illuminate. A good question can be valuable even if it never gets fully answered, if it changes how you see and engage with the world. The digital age, questions at our fingertips. The Internet has fundamentally transformed humanity's relationship with questions and answers. For the vast majority of human history, Most questions you might have were difficult or impossible to answer. If you wondered about something, you had to either figure it out yourself through direct experimentation, ask someone else who might know, or simply live with the uncertainty. Libraries and books helped, but finding the right information in a library required knowing where to look, having access to that library, and investing significant time in searching. Now, in developed parts of the world, you can ask your phone virtually any factual question and receive an answer within seconds. This revolution in information access has changed not just how we answer questions, but how we think about questioning itself. The immediate availability of answers has complicated effects on curiosity. On one hand, it's never been easier to satisfy your curiosity about factual matters. Wondering who wrote a particular book, what the population of Indonesia is, or how a combustion engine works. You can find out immediately. This ease of answering specific factual questions, what researchers call specific curiosity, means you don't waste time and energy on questions where the information already exists and is easily accessible. This is generally positive. You can quickly fill small knowledge gaps and move on to more interesting questions. The cognitive bandwidth you might have spent remembering phone numbers or looking up movie times can now be devoted to more complex thinking. On the other hand, some researchers worry that instant access to answers might reduce the deeper forms of curiosity that drive sustained learning and discovery. If you can immediately look up any fact, you might not develop the patience and persistence needed to wrestle with difficult questions that don't have quick answers. The discomfort of not knowing, which in the past might have motivated sustained investigation, now lasts only as long as it takes to perform a search. This could reduce the development of what some call intellectual perseverance, the ability to sit with hard questions and work through them systematically over time. The instant gratification of online answers might train your brain to expect quick resolution to all curiosity, making it harder to engage with questions that require longer periods of uncertain exploration. The quality of the curiosity-satisfying experience has changed as well. When you had to go to a library and spend time searching for information, the process itself often led to serendipitous discovery. While looking for one thing, you'd notice other interesting books, glance at topics you weren't initially seeking, encounter unexpected connections. The friction in the information-seeking process created opportunities for diversive curiosity, for following tangents and discovering interests you didn't know you had. Digital searches are more efficient, but often more narrow. You search for exactly what you want, get a specific answer, and move on without necessarily encountering related information that might spark new questions. The ease of finding answers means you're less likely to wander through adjacent knowledge spaces and stumble upon surprising connections. Search algorithms and recommendation systems create another subtle but important effect. They learn from your behavior, figuring out what kinds of information you usually seek and giving you more of the same. Over time, this can create filter bubbles where the questions you think to ask and the information you're exposed to become narrower and more aligned with your existing interests and beliefs. Questions that might challenge your worldview or expose you to unfamiliar perspectives are less likely to occur to you because the informational environment you inhabit doesn't surface the puzzles and contradictions that might spark them. Your curiosity gets channeled into certain grooves, potentially becoming less broad and exploratory than it might be in a more diverse information environment. Social media platforms have created new forms of question asking and answer seeking that blend information gathering with social performance. When you post a question on social media, you're often not just seeking information but also signaling something about yourself, engaging in social interaction, and performing a kind of public curiosity. The answers you receive might be less authoritative than what you'd find through careful research, but they come embedded in social context from people you know or follow, which gives them a different kind of value. This social dimension of digital questioning can make information seeking more engaging and communal, but it can also introduce biases and misinformation that wouldn't be as prevalent in more curated information sources. The Internet has also made it easier to ask questions anonymously or pseudonymously, which removes some of the social barriers that suppress curiosity in face-to-face contexts. If you're embarrassed about not knowing something, you can look it up privately without anyone knowing you didn't already have that knowledge. If you're curious about topics that are taboo or sensitive in your social circle, you can explore them online without social judgment. This reduction in the social costs of asking certain questions is genuinely liberating for many people, allowing them to follow curiosity into areas they might otherwise avoid. Of course, this same anonymity can enable harmful behaviors, but for curiosity specifically, it often serves a positive function. The sheer volume of information available creates both opportunities and challenges. In principle, you have access to more knowledge than any previous generation could have imagined. In practice, you're still limited by attention, time, and the need to filter the vast majority of available information. The questions you ask determine what small slice of the Internet's knowledge you'll actually encounter. This makes question-asking skills even more important. Knowing how to formulate good search queries, how to evaluate the reliability of information you find, how to follow promising leads while not getting lost in rabbit holes. These are all essential skills for navigating the modern information landscape. The person who asks better questions, who can zero in on relevant information and assess its quality, has a significant advantage over someone with the same Internet access but less developed questioning skills. Perhaps most intriguingly, the Internet hasn't reduced the importance of asking questions that don't have established answers. Scientific research, philosophical inquiry, artistic exploration, all the domains where human curiosity pushes into genuinely unknown territory, remain as important as ever. You can't Google the solution to an unsolved problem in mathematics, or find the cure for a disease that hasn't been cured yet, or discover online the answer to a question that no one has ever successfully answered. The Internet helps with background research, with learning what's already known, but it doesn't eliminate the need for original inquiry and discovery. If anything, having easy access to existing knowledge makes it more apparent where the genuine gaps are, where human curiosity still has work to do in extending the boundaries of what we collectively know. Cultivating curiosity. Learning to ask better questions, given that curiosity can fade, can be suppressed by social and educational environments, and faces barriers both external and internal. How can someone deliberately cultivate it? How do you learn to ask better questions, to maintain or rekindle the wondering spirit that comes naturally to children but often dims in adults. The answers aren't simple or formulaic, but research on curiosity and the experiences of a people who've successfully maintained or developed strong questioning habits suggest several approaches worth considering. The first barrier to address is often emotional. Fear of looking ignorant, shame about not knowing, anxiety about asking the wrong question. These feelings inhibit curiosity before it can even express itself in actual question asking. Reducing these emotional barriers requires both internal work and supportive environments. Internally, you can work on reframing not knowing as a natural and even desirable state rather than a shameful deficiency. Everyone is ignorant about most things. The sum of human knowledge is so vast that even the most learned person knows only a tiny fraction of it. Recognizing this helps to put your own gaps in perspective. When you don't know something, that's not a personal failing. It's the normal human condition, and asking questions is how that condition gets ameliorated. Some people find it helpful to explicitly cultivate what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset, the belief that abilities and knowledge can be developed through effort and learning, rather than being fixed traits you either have or don't have. From a growth mindset perspective, not knowing something just means you haven't learned it yet, and asking questions is part of the learning process, not an admission of permanent ignorance. Externally, creating or seeking out environments where questioning is encouraged and valued makes an enormous difference. In some contexts, asking questions is seen as a sign of engagement and intelligence rather than confusion or slowness. People in those environments naturally ask more questions because they've learned that doing so brings positive rather than negative consequences. If you're in an environment that doesn't support curiosity, you might need to deliberately seek out spaces where it does. This could mean finding discussion groups, online communities, or friendships with people who value questioning, or advocating for changes in your existing environments to make them more curiosity-friendly. Teachers and leaders can have enormous impact by explicitly encouraging questions, by responding to them with interest and respect rather than impatience, and by modeling curiosity through their own question-asking. Practical strategies for generating more and better questions can help overcome the inertia of habitual non-questioning. One simple but effective technique is to deliberately slow down and pause when you encounter new information. Instead of immediately accepting it and moving on, spend a moment asking yourself questions about it. Why might this be true? What evidence supports it? What would I expect to see if this were false? Are there alternative explanations? This kind of active engagement transforms passive information consumption into interactive learning. Even asking questions you don't immediately pursue, just formulating them in your mind helps keep your curiosity muscles exercised. Another approach is to practice following your tangential interests, rather than always staying focused on immediate tasks. When you're reading something and a word or reference piques your interest, take a moment to look it up, even if it's not directly relevant to your main purpose. Allow yourself to wander through information space a bit, pursuing connections that interest you. This diversive curiosity, while it might seem less productive than focused, specific curiosity, often leads to unexpected learning and surprising connections that enrich your overall understanding. Obviously, this needs to be balanced with the need to actually complete tasks and meet obligations. But many people err too far in the direction of rigid focus and would benefit from more cognitive wandering. Learning to ask better questions, not just more questions, requires attention to the quality and framing of your inquiries. Some questions are more generative than others, more likely to lead to interesting answers or new directions of exploration. Open-ended questions that invite explanation rather than simple yes, no answers tend to be more fruitful. Questions that ask about causes, processes, or relationships typically lead to richer understanding than questions that ask only about facts or categories. Instead of asking, "What is that?" asking, "How does that work?" or "Why does that happen?" tends to open up deeper investigation. Learning to recognize when your question isn't quite hitting the mark and refining it until it better captures what you're really curious about is a skill that develops with practice. Engaging with people who have different expertise, backgrounds, or perspectives naturally stimulates curiosity. When you encounter someone who sees the world quite differently than you do, whether due to their profession, culture, life experiences, or personality, the gaps between your understanding and theirs become visible in ways that generate questions. What do they know that you don't? How do they think about issues you've also considered? What assumptions do they make that differ from yours? These questions can be asked internally as you think about the interaction later, or explicitly in conversation if the context is appropriate. Diverse relationships and interactions become engines for curiosity, constantly revealing new things to wonder about. Spending time with children can be a powerful reminder of what unconstrained curiosity looks like. Kids ask questions without hesitation, without worrying about whether they seem smart or whether the question is appropriate. They're genuinely curious, and they express that curiosity directly. While adults obviously can't and shouldn't copy childhood behavior exactly, watching children question and explore can help you recognize how much you've learned to suppress your own curiosity. It can inspire you to reclaim some of that directness, to allow yourself to wonder more openly, to give yourself permission to not know things and to seek answers without self-consciousness. Reading widely and across disciplines exposes you to more ideas and information, which, as we discussed earlier regarding knowledge gaps, is actually a prerequisite for curiosity. You need to know enough about a topic to recognize interesting gaps and puzzles in your understanding. The person who never reads about science won't develop scientific curiosity because they won't encounter the phenomena and questions that make science fascinating. The person who never engages with history won't wonder about historical questions. Breadth of learning, even at a relatively surface level, seeds future curiosity by populating your mind with enough knowledge to make gaps visible and interesting. Finally, it's worth recognizing that curiosity, like many cognitive and emotional capacities, varies naturally both between people and within the same person at different times. Some days you might feel intensely curious, full of questions, eager to explore. Other days you might feel more closed off, content with what you know, not particularly interested in seeking new information. Both states are normal. The goal isn't to force yourself into constant peak curiosity, but rather to maintain enough of a questioning mindset that you don't lose the capacity entirely. Even people who seem extraordinarily curious probably don't maintain that at maximum intensity every moment. They have just cultivated the habit of returning to curiosity regularly, of noticing when they've been too long in a state of closed certainty, and deliberately opening themselves back up to questions. Conclusion: the eternal question. As we drift toward the end of this exploration, it's worth pausing to appreciate the strange loop we've been traveling. We asked why humans ask questions, and in pursuit of that question, we've asked dozens more. Why does curiosity fade in school? What neural mechanisms make information feel rewarding? How do different types of curiosity serve different functions? When do we avoid knowing rather than seeking it? Each answer we've encountered hasn't closed the inquiry, but rather revealed new layers, new dimensions, new questions waiting to be explored. This endless recursion. Questions leading to answers leading to more questions, is perhaps the most fundamental characteristic of human curiosity itself. We are creatures who cannot stop wondering, who encounter each new piece of understanding not as an endpoint, but as a fresh beginning. The capacity to ask questions might be the most distinctly human thing about us. Many species show curiosity in their behavior, exploring novel objects, or investigating changes in their environment. But the depth and abstraction of human questioning appears unique. We don't just wonder about the immediate practical things that affect our survival. We wonder about stars too distant to ever reach, about events that happened before we were born, about the nature of consciousness and meaning and existence itself. We ask questions that can't be answered within a single lifetime, questions that our entire species has been grappling with for thousands of years without resolution. This restless reaching toward understanding, this refusal to accept mystery and ignorance as permanent states, has driven humanity's most remarkable achievements. Yet, as we've seen, the human relationship with questions is complicated by fear, culture, individual differences, and the practical limits of time and attention. We can't ask about everything. We must choose, consciously or not, which questions to pursue and which to set aside. We sometimes avoid questions whose answers might disturb us. We're influenced by social pressures about what questions are appropriate and what kinds of curiosity are valued. The educational and cultural environments we grow up in either nurture our questioning spirit or dampen it. Understanding these factors, seeing how curiosity can be both encouraged and suppressed, helps us appreciate why some people maintain robust questioning throughout life while others gradually stop asking, accepting their current understanding as sufficient. The evolutionary story of how humans became such relentless questioners involves our peculiar neural architecture, the metabolic costs and benefits of large brains, the development of language that allowed questions to extend beyond the immediate and concrete, and the social complexity that made understanding other minds crucially important. These factors didn't just give us the capacity to ask questions. They created an environment where asking questions became essential, where the curious individuals who kept probing and exploring gained advantages that shaped our entire species. We became human partly through becoming creatures who ask why, who imagine how things might be different, who wonder about what lies beyond our current horizon. Technology has transformed how we ask and answer questions, giving us unprecedented access to information while potentially changing the phenomenology of curiosity itself. The friction between question and answer has almost disappeared for certain types of questions, which carries both benefits and potential costs. We can learn faster, cover more ground, satisfy curiosity that in previous generations would have remained unfulfilled. But we might also lose something in the immediacy of answers. The depth of engagement that comes from sitting with difficult questions over time. The serendipitous discoveries that happen when information is harder to access and you encounter things you weren't explicitly seeking. The digital age demands new wisdom about how to question effectively in an environment of overwhelming information abundance. Throughout this journey, we've seen that questions serve functions beyond just information gathering. They're tools for building social connections, for signaling interest and care, for establishing trust and intimacy. They're engines of creativity and innovation, opening up possibility spaces and challenging assumptions. They're instruments of learning and personal growth, guiding attention toward gaps in understanding and motivating the effort needed to close those gaps. A life rich in good questions is typically a life rich in learning, growth, relationships, and meaning. The person who stops asking questions in some sense stops developing, settling into fixed patterns of thought and behavior that might be comfortable but leave potential unrealized. Perhaps most importantly, we've discovered that curiosity isn't a fixed trait you either have or don't have, but rather a capacity that can be cultivated and strengthened with intention and practice. The factors that suppress curiosity, fear of judgment, rigid educational environments, cultural norms against questioning, are real and powerful, but they're not insurmountable. Adults can relearn how to wonder, can reclaim the questioning spirit that feels so natural in childhood but often gets buried under years of social conditioning. This means that no matter where you are in your relationship with curiosity, change is possible. You can learn to ask more questions, better questions, to follow your tangential interests, to sit with not knowing without discomfort, to embrace the uncertainty that questions create. As you let these thoughts settle, consider what questions live in you right now. What are you curious about? What do you wonder when your mind is allowed to wander? What have you stopped asking about because it seemed too complicated, too uncomfortable, too impractical? Those questions are invitations, doorways into richer engagement with the world and with your own experience. They're precious not because they'll necessarily lead to tidy answers, but because they represent your mind reaching toward something, growing, exploring, refusing to accept ignorance as the final word. The questions you ask shape the person you become, defining what you learn, how you think, what connections you make, what possibilities you discover. The human need to know, the drive that generates this endless stream of questions, is part of what makes us conscious in the particular way that humans are conscious. We don't just experience the present moment. We wonder about it, probe it, try to understand it in relation to everything else we know. We're always a step removed from pure experience, looking at it through the lens of inquiry, asking what it means, why it is this way, how it connects to other things. This might sometimes feel like a burden, this inability to simply be without questioning. But it's also a gift, the foundation of understanding and growth. To be human is to ask. To be fully human is to never stop asking. So, as you drift toward sleep tonight, let your mind rest in the gentle space of curiosity. Don't force questions, but don't push them away either. Let them bubble up naturally, those little wonderings about how things work, why things are the way they are, what might be possible if things were different. Each question is a small light in the darkness, illuminating some tiny corner of mystery. Together, across all of humanity, across all of time, these questions weave together into a vast exploratory project that is never finished, always growing, always reaching toward deeper understanding. You are part of that project. Your curiosity matters. Your questions contribute to the great human conversation that extends backward through all our ancestors and forward through all who will come after. Before I let you go, if you've enjoyed this peaceful exploration of why we ask questions, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps more people find these quiet journeys into curiosity and wonder. It helps grow this community of sleepy thinkers who gather here to explore ideas in a gentle, thoughtful way. But whether you like or subscribe or not, thank you for spending this time with me, for bringing your own questions and curiosity to this exploration. May your questions lead you toward fascinating answers, and may those answers always lead to even more interesting questions. Rest well, wonder freely. Good night.